tomorrow you couldn't speak your mind. This weekend, go to the movie theater to watch a new movie. Or this month, go to the fair to ride your favorite rides. For millions, this is a reality that involves something we often take advantage of daily: human rights. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Recently, I read a local American Civil Liberties Union Florida article. It discusses Florida's new abortion ban and the dangers it causes women and members of the LGBTQ community. The article argues that the new legislation doesn't allow for a safe abortion. Some feel that this is a violation of the right to medical services and a woman's body. Overall, human rights can allow for equality and dignity. I also read an article from Physicians for Human Rights, and it states all the human rights violations that the United States has committed. From separating families due to immigration laws, abortion bans, and torture policies, although the U.S. is one of the few countries that has decent human rights policies, the article proves that all governments must be held accountable. From a governmental perspective, an advantage of human rights is an increasing accountability for governments. However, the topics of human rights can also reduce peace. According to the International Amnesty organization, a decrease in human rights and rights policy is just escalating the violence in the Israel-Palestine conflict. From October alone, Israeli forces have killed more than 21,000 Gazians, mostly civilians and many unlawfully. From a historical standpoint, an apparent disadvantage of human rights is that they can be difficult to enforce. Enforcement from international response, such as the United Nations, is likely to be ineffective. For example, the UN arms mission imposed on Libya in 2011 has been deemed totally ineffective by a UN panel of experts, with civilians continuing to suffer widespread rights violations. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. These wise words from Robert Swan reminds us of the environmental issues and concerns that are apparent all around us. Environmental issues are relating to the negative impacts of human activities on the natural world. Upon reading a UN article on the environment and its impacts on public health, I learned that there is a link between the environment and disease. It explains how stress-producing environmental factors can contribute to increased weight for the environment around us and can impact our mental health. From a medical viewpoint, a clear upside to addressing environmental concerns is that it can improve public health. I also read an article from ScienceDirect.org discussing the depletion of natural resources and their impact on environmental quality. A research study conducted by ScienceDirect in China showed that energy usage, energy imports, and natural resource depletion degrades the environmental quality in China. The article claims why this reduction in resources is an issue, and most importantly, if there was a sustainable use of natural resources, it could prevent significant environmental damage. From an environmental standpoint, an advantage of addressing environmental issues is an abundance and increase in important natural resources. However, addressing environmental concerns can decrease profits for companies that rely on them. Worth $4.2 trillion, the fossil fuel industry is reliant on fossil fuels and environmental issues. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists.org, Chevron, a company headquartered in the United States, reported earnings of $35.5 billion, respectively, during 2022. Thus, addressing environmental concerns reduces profits for certain industries. Another challenge addressing environmental concerns can cause is that policies are difficult to implement and are often failures. For instance, the article Environmental Consequences of Water Withdrawals and Drainage of Wetlands from the University of Florida highlights that draining wetlands for agriculture in South Florida has led to significant ecological impacts. The drainage of over 1 million acres of organic soil has caused soil loss and altered the region's natural ability to manage water flow and quality.
Sports and leisure is typically a common topic that's talked around people, mostly young people. Most parents encourage sports into their kids at a young age to implement a strong foundation of confidence and social skills for a lifelong well-being and personal development. An example of this would be an article published by NPR that mentioned how 2 parents introduced sports into their kids at a young age. A couple of things that caught my attention was how they mentioned that sports aren't just preparing them for the next game, but instead a much broader roles in life. They also mentioned how past sports-related events in their childhood related to their day-to-day work experience. And while sports and leisure activities do improve physical and mental health and also increases social relationships, it also comes with very serious risks such as environmental concerns and risk of injuries. Take the example of how each flight we decide to take to relax in these leisure activities lurks the harsh penalties on Mother Earth. The article published by the Miami Herald mentioned how tourism accounts for 8% of world greenhouse gas emissions.
Anyone who paid attention in science class knows how detrimental an excess of greenhouse gases are for the environment, trapping heat on our planet and worsening climate change.
I bet not many thought of how kids could be in disadvantage of these activities. Well, the Associated Press mentioned how the Major League Baseball players and their impressive pitches are having an effect on kids. The more tricks and speed records they break, the higher the rate of injuries in children trying to recreate them.
These constant injuries in a young athlete can put strain on their health while also affecting parents who have to handle the cost brought with these. However, one can't forget the financial benefits these activities bring. Major sporting events like the Super Bowl and FIFA Cup generate billions in revenue and attract significant spending from fans.
Meanwhile, culturally speaking, sports and leisure are powerful tools for connection, expression, and transformation, including social norms and gender roles.
I hope that with all the information previously mentioned, you can make more informed decisions when playing a sport or going on a trip.
As a current high school student with a slight dislike in mathematics, I can speak for those who think that mathematics are hard. But after some research and some projects assigned by Dr. Lewis, I realized that math is pretty much everywhere. Take, for example, parabolas. Yes, that same parabola and the equation that you couldn't learn to pass the algebra EOC. Some people don't realize that parabolas are everywhere, from volleyball to soccer or simply water. Recently, I read this article published by NPR that mentioned how math was a criterion for truth in the natural world, mentioning how mathematics have the force of real truth, being independent of interpretation or context. Why would this be good? Well, because this would mean that mathematics is a universal language that bridges and improves clear communication gaps across cultures and languages. On top of this, mathematics also hold predictive powers, just like predicting future events or weather. And us people in Florida, we know how important this is. Well, hurricanes. Yes, this all sounds good and great,
but unfortunately, mathematics can prove to be a difficult task for many, resulting in a lack of knowledge regarding said topic.
The Miami Herald mentioned how studies found major disconnect between Black girls and mathematics, saying how math goes beyond schools and influences in culture. Female students mentioned how Black girls don't see themselves in mathematics. Later, then publishing a journal that helps explain why the nation is missing out on the talents of many underserved students.
Educationally speaking, income disparities and minority status can affect students and how much they learn, especially in the realm of math. With so many factors affecting students, it's hard to make sure they're taught properly and learn those skills.
This also implies the gap between low and high-performing students in the U.S. The Associated Press mentioned how after the pandemic, 8th grade math students who were at the lowest 10% decreased their math scores by 6 points, while the highest 10% increased their scores by only 3 points.
Let's not forget how mathematical errors and miscalculations can lead to severe consequences, especially when it comes to infrastructure. An article on the Daily Commercial highlighted how essential understanding mathematics is to construction projects. Without it, materials needed for projects can be over or underestimated, leading to excess spending or even faulty built structures. From a social vantage point, we rely on mathematics to help us ensure our buildings and skyscrapers have minimal risks of failure.
Globalization is the process by which businesses or other organizations have international influence. However, it can be quite the double-edged sword. While bringing in some cash and opportunities, among other things, it can also risk overdependence and culture uniformity. It allows for economic growth with job creation, trade, and cultural exchange. For example, the Miami Herald, when speaking about the Amaze Partners with Impact, unlocked the commerce market, which expanded global reach, expressed that previously many creators avoided selling in the EU due to high costs and logistical hurdles. Now they can enter these markets with more confidence in the fan experience, showing how tearing barriers brings business expansion, allowing participation in the global economy. From an economic perspective, it brings financial prosperity. Additionally, it increases international cooperation. The United Nations stated in an article, "We are witnessing the emergence of a new understanding of ourselves, a new ontology of life, shifting from a worldview defined by individualism and atomism to one defined by global structures of interdependence, emphasizing how globalization can aid cooperation. However, it can decrease culture as local traditions get outshined by those that are more mainstream. Like how languages are very important when it comes to one's culture, but with English becoming popular, younger generations forget their native tongue, demonstrating how certain things can be forgotten or overshadowed by things that are more out there. From a cultural perspective, it could lead to cultural erosion, but not only that, Globalization can also hinder development within a country with overdependency. NPR article states that Bangladesh's garment workers are impacted by Americans paying less for clothes as a result of globalization and being overdependent on them. So, can we really afford to risk our unique cultures for the sake of global expansion? The second one is brought into this world. They are taught numerous things through numerous medias, through their parents, television, or literature. Literature are written works, whether that be the nursery book your parents read to you or your boss assigning you an article or email to analyze. Literature is thrusted upon you from adolescence to adulthood, but what are the pros and what are the cons? Well, for one, literature increases emotional intelligence as well as analytical intelligence. For example, the National Library of Medicine conducted a study viewing how reading might affect one's intellect. They studied nearly 1,900 pairs of identical twins to see if differences in reading ability led to anything later on. They found that the twins, better at reading early on, tended to become smarter. From a psychological perspective, this aids one's cognitive development. But not only that, literature allows for the spread of knowledge and ideas, like how in United Nations article when honoring poet and Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore, they said, his firm stance against communalism and other corrupt systems serves as a reminder of the need to remain vigilant and united in our total rejection of all forms of violence, bigotry, and injustice, highlighting how it can serve as a moral and social guide. However, literature's production methods can cause harm to society at times. For example, according to Miami Herald, a publisher who manufactured Dr. Seuss's books ceased its production, which raised its pricing significantly, originally selling them for $5 to $10 to about $300 to $500 on eBay, which is absurd for a mere nursery book. From an environmental perspective, producing traditional literature can lead to deforestation with the demand for trees and paper. Additionally, it can hinder society with false information and old messaging that isn't considered moral or correct. With all these factors in mind, how do we balance the benefits of literature with its potential drawbacks?
In society, it is common to see digital media in our current day and time, right? But paper print is a much better alternative because it creates healthier habits, because it leads to us not being on technology all day, and it's also very effective for lasting long and not losing data or information, which makes it reliable. But digital media can affect and worsen the health very negatively and can make people depend on technology, which will lead to people having to use it every day in their life and not having a sense of responsibility or independency. From an ethical standpoint, this is negative and is allowing people to lose touch of humanity and how people truly are. People depend on digital and technology medias, losing their own sense of life and responsibility and making them struggle with normal day-to-day tasks, which everyone has to do. I read an article on BBC News that older generations don't have much eye vision problems because they are more involved with paper print instead of digital print, compared to younger generations who are more on digital media and print and on technology, which will obviously worsen their health and vision. And that also ties into why digital media can affect and worsen health and make people depend on technology compared to paper print, which creates healthier habits and is effective. And also, if you look at this from an economic perspective, money loss will obviously occur because if everything and all the information is online, then everything is able to be bypassed and made free, which doesn't benefit the economy and doesn't allow it to increase. I also read on Miami Herald that the Saturday print edition was going away and turning into digital print because it's more common. But of course, this would just lead to more health problems, which proves my point on how digital media can worsen health. As well as U.S. Pew Research Center also states how many people are rapidly depending on phones, which ties into the cons of how digital media makes people depend on technology and isn't effective for day-to-day life. Media, and you see lots of information and communication spread around all throughout. Well, that's the freedom from censorship, which is not having suppression of speech, public communication, or other information. A positive aspect would be that you can connect with people much easily and spread awareness on important topics and issues.
For instance, a UN article on the freedom of expression highlighted how reporters are free to raise awareness and speak on issues only when their free speech is protected and censorship does not restrict them. Also,
If you look at this from a social aspect, everyone can connect and socialize much more easily with their open thoughts and views. People can find each other's people, families could connect and reach each other out much easily. Although, on the contrary, disagreement and conflict can occur because of no restrictions, as well as misinformation and false statements could be shared. Now, if you look at this from an educational perspective, this could be negative due to misinformation and false statements being shared, causing rumors or a mentality of a child to disintegrate in an educational environment. I actually read on NPR that Donald Trump is trying to get more censorship freedom in the US in schools so that more students can share and express themselves and connect with people since anti-socialness is very common. Well, this also connects. Miami Herald had also stated how educational governors in Florida are trying to remove freedom of speech because of its negativities and how it can affect a student in their educational environment and not be able to learn properly because of the freedom of censorship and the spread rumors and misinformation as well as disagreements.
All in all, censorship or the lack thereof plays a vital role in our society, many struggling to determine where the line should be drawn. In today's world,
Everyone is able to get a hold of food and water without a second thought. As population and global warming increases, it has never been so urgent to have food and water security. Food and water security is basically when you have access to enough quantity and a good enough quality of food and water. Food and water security are essential to improve people's overall health. The National Institute of Health states that access to clean water supply and prepared food reduce risk of sickness. Food and water security don't just apply for our personal health, though. It's needed for our crops and livestock to have growth. I read on FDA.cs.gov that there are plans in place to protect food manufacturing and inspection. This is important because scientifically speaking, there are a lot of chemicals involved to carry out crops and livestock that are later sold, protecting us and safety of the animals that provide for us. But there's millions of others around the world that lack a clean supply of food and water. UN.org shows that 2.4 billion people worldwide live in water-stressed countries. This is seen especially in Puerto Rico right now because of how many natural disasters they've been hit by, like hurricanes that compromise their water security. From an environmental perspective, these disasters won't go away anytime soon and will continue to harm the people of PR. Furthermore, not having food and water secure can cause harmful civil unrest. It is brought up in CSIS.org, Dangerously Hungry, that over 15,000 people had been killed in farmer conflicts. People resort to violence to secure food and water at the last resort when they get desperate, and ultimately hurt many around them. Overall, food and water security is fundamental to our survival and well-being, and if awareness is raised, it can create better lives. Language is known to be the main form of how development of society came to be today. The world today would be in a very different state today without it. Language is a system of communication that is used by the people of a particular country or region for speaking and writing. At its most common use, language accounts for being able to share human expression. One example of this is storytelling in a way that a person can share their personal experiences with others. An article called The Power of Language by news.stanford.edu supports that language is a primary tool for expression and communication, backing up with speaking and writing reading based off of the research. This shows the importance in a broad aspect of life. Language also promotes cultural understanding and empathy. For instance, it could be seen here in Florida. The Miami Herald's How Have Different Cultures in South Florida Influenced Spanglish states that languages influence each other too, just like cultures do when they come into contact with each other. People from different cultures learn from their values and traditions as they communicate, just like how Miami came to be known as Cuban, since Cuban slang and practices were brought in by immigrants. From a social stance, this essentially creates diversity. Looking to the other side, though, there can be severe miscommunication through language. For one, there can be a misunderstanding through what one is trying to convey, which leads to conflict. GlobalTranslation.com references how language barriers are becoming more common while organizations expand into international markets. In business especially, this can be a major problem because many companies rely on the other countries for supplies. There's a high chance what they ask of their manufacturer or supplier to be misinterpreted and wrong orders are spread. From an economical perspective, this leads to discrepancies in a business's needs. Evidently, attempting to get across ideas to different language-speaking people is inefficient.
This is seen when others constantly use technology to translate what they are telling somebody else. Not everyone has the luxury of a translator, making communication much faster, as to having to type out a whole sentence every minute on a translating app or website. It makes communication extremely tedious and time-consuming. All in all, language is key for enabling people to get through ideas and expression with equal consequence.
Whenever one thinks of the countryside versus the city, many arguments pop up in one's head. Thinking urban, one pictures large populations, skyscrapers, and big cities. However, rural refers to low population and well-preserved fields of greenery. Regardless of the imagery, both areas have their respective concerns. While rural areas provide increased privacy and favorable cost of living, they also provide poor infrastructure and low job opportunities. On the contrary, urban areas have social advantages and advanced technology.
But they also bring along detrimental crime rates along with hazardous pollution.
An article from Miami Herald states, as the United States continues to recover from the recession wrought by the COVID-19 pandemic, the rural counties that EIG analyzed did better than urban counties.
Now, one would think it would be the other way around, but socially speaking, rural counties have lower populations and lower chances of contagious diseases such as COVID-19 spreading due to their equally low population density. All this is due to the value of and increased privacy in rural areas, where people have more space to themselves compared to cities. Moreover,
rural areas have poor infrastructure. In an article from BBC News, it states that a cross-party group of MPs and peers found the rural economy was 18% less productive than the national average. If this gap was reduced, it could add 43 billion to the UK economy. Economically speaking, they would benefit from an addition, but unfortunately, rural areas aren't able to provide that
due to their struggling infrastructure, which doesn't drive as much commerce as urban places. Recently, CBS News released a report on how 6 of the 10 U.S. cities with extremely high levels of air pollution are in South California, a heavily urban location. Due to all the vehicles, both from the average individual and company shipments, along other factors, the air quality has degraded over the years. From an environmental vantage point, this shows how detrimental urban places can be to our atmosphere and planet, yet they still remain a core aspect of modern-day society. All in all, both rural and urban places give one much to think about, their issues and complexities on display alongside various benefits.
You know when you are watching TV or listening to music and you get that few-minute break in between. Nobody likes them and everybody tries to skip over them, but why are they there? It's called advertising. Advertising is a paid form of communication used to inform and persuade a target audience to take a specific action, often to buy a product or service. A positive aspect of advertising is it increases and promotes businesses and ideas. Also, it can share effective information to listeners. A few years ago, there was a 25-hour marathon at that focused on advertising by having students create a professional marketing materials for nonprofits. Profits benefited from getting this help for free, which they can't always afford. From an educational perspective, advertising gets students a real experience, helping them build skills like creativity, teamwork, and help when working with clients. Now, this marathon helped nonprofit, but what about the companies that do have to pay? Advertising can be an expensive burden for many organizations. Just this year, CBS News came out with an article that claimed that an ad about 30 seconds during the Super Bowl could cost about $8 million, which is an insane amount of money. This is because Super Bowl is a widely streamed game everyone watches, so it is expensive, but it could also reach various targeted audiences. A target audience in advertising is a certain group of people, generalized, that are most likely to want or buy a service. This leads me to my next con. Advertising can lead to misinformation spread or exaggerated claims. Just a few months ago, 2 of Australia's biggest supermarket chains are currently being sued for alleged false gouging and anti-competitive prices. It was said on BBC News that they falsely claimed to have dropped the prices of hundreds of items. From a social point of view, the false advertising can lead to a mistrust in customers and exploit certain groups.
Whether it's conflicts such as World War I, World War II, the Revolutionary War, or even the American Civil War, or simply terrorist attacks such as the 9/11 attacks, individuals have always thought these events to be horrible and defined them as horrid acts. But simply, wars
Are defined as armed disputes between groups. Conflicts are serious disagreements that could lead to such wars, and terrorism is unlawful use of violence for purposes of intimidation, coercion, or ransom. Now, such events are always thought to be horrible, but the event of war or terrorism has shown to boost the economy and completely reform society. For example, the U.S. division of the History Channel published an article on what really ended the Great Depression, and it was found that World War II majorly boosted the economy by making more jobs and causing for the unemployment rate to go down. The issue with conflicts such as wars or forms of terrorism are that they obstruct the daily functions of a country and they hinder the area and its people. Miami Herald published an article speaking of the horrors of a shooting in Orlando and how it had links of possible terrorism. The article speaks about how the public responded in complete fear. The same individuals grieved and were outraged, showing that this event caused a complete disturbance to the people of that community and hindered their daily routines and environment. Now, the United Nations posted a report speaking of how the Ukraine and Russia conflict caused for over 6 million refugees to spread across Europe. The report also spoke about how this was the largest population displacement crisis since World War II. Psychologically speaking, these conflicts and wars have caused horrible damage to the individuals that have been forced to displace, mentally affecting them. Yet, on a social stance, these wars and conflicts and forms of terrorism have provided beneficial reforms to society. Yet it leads for one to question, when will the government finally take care of its people? When thinking of surveillance and privacy, one can picture cameras inserted in public spaces, recording, or people in private properties trying to make sure that their safety is maintained. But at its core essence, surveillance is the act of keeping close watch over someone or something, and should always protect privacy, which is the freedom from unauthorized intrusion of one's private life. News4Jax recently published an article which spoke about the new regulations input for the Orange Park Junior High, such as more cameras and security staff, therefore increasing surveillance. And such surveillance increases safety and provides evidence for crimes or events, therefore ensuring justice. Ethically speaking, it's society's duty to make sure that justice is upheld, and hence, it seems that surveillance is the adequate measure to take. However, surveillance has its flaws, as it can decrease privacy. For instance, an article published by BBC News speaking of how worker surveillance is simply backfiring on the employers because of the software that employers are using in order to monitor their employees and their devices. However, this isn't the most effective, as the software itself can be intrusive. This means is that the workers can't even go to the bathroom or take a simple break or simply take a phone call without them being flagged and possibly getting a warning. Not only that, but the software sometimes has control of whatever the worker is doing. Essentially, the surveillance software itself violates privacy. Furthermore, faulty surveillance threatens individuals' reputation. For instance, For Washington reported how a woman discovered a deepfake of herself, and also stated how in some situations, such form of deepfakes have been offered as proof for surveillance, when in reality, these videos and clips aren't real or any form of surveillance, they're just fake. Socially speaking, this can discredit the accuracy and efficiency of surveillance, which society relies on. Such videos depicting false realities can defame individuals in said videos by showing them committing actions they never actually took. Now, is relying on faulty systems to ensure society's safety the right thing to do?
What would your life be like if your family had never moved to a new country? Much of who and where we are today is due to population and migration. Population is defined as all the inhabitants of a particular town, area, or country, and migration refers to the movement of people or animals from one region to another. Every day, over 70,000 foreigners arrive to the U.S. in an attempt to start a new life. Because of migration, we have seen a boost in the economy and the promotion of diversity. However, 2 months ago, Governor Ron DeSantis signed off on an immigration law to help President Donald Trump follow through on his plans of mass deportations. Upon reading an article from Tampa Bay Times regarding this matter, it discussed how this law was going to work and the impact it would have on immigrants. More specifically, it mentioned how the law was going to enact stronger border security, apply tougher penalties, and end programs that helped immigrants get legal status. Additionally, the Associated Press published an article about the provisions and costs that the law is going to bring along. It stated that this legislation will require the government to set aside nearly $300 million for immigration enforcement. Economically speaking, if the government continues to spend millions of dollars on just deportation and immigration prevention instead of also focusing on other important matters, it may lead to imbalances in the nation's economy and resources. Furthermore, the Washington Post also published an article about the critics the law has been receiving, as well as other provisions. More importantly, it explained how the bill promises $1,000 bonuses to law enforcement officers who will help arrest illegal immigrants. These officers are allowed to arrest, detain, and interrogate immigrants as well as carry out street-level enforcement. When we think about this from a psychological perspective, when immigrants are constantly being detained and interrogated, it diminishes their mental health and instills fear. Overall, many people believe that the law contains many loopholes and contradictions, as well as uncertainty within the country, which leads us to question, if the government is willing to go to these lengths to prevent immigration, what's next for the future of our country?